Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Lately, so many caring, concerned people, including me, have been questioning whether the world is up to John Lennon's challenge from that song. Those are lyrics from Imagine. Whether the world is up to that challenge. Specifically, I'm going to talk about due to the ever louder din of alt-right hate. During our Martin Luther King Jr. birthday service, Sam Kirkland presented King's important message, and that message gave me hope. He quoted King, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Now, many congregants have asked me over time and asked me and other clergy members what it looks like. What does it look like to use love to drive out hate? How do we do that? What specifically can any of us do to change the hearts of hate? Well, you should know that ministers never answer directly. They just tell stories and allow you to figure it out yourself. In fact, often the best way to answer a question is to tell a story, so that's what I'm going to do now. A couple quick stories. Derek Black is the son of a neo-Nazi white supremacist named Don Black, who is the founder of one of the most recognizable online hate communities, Stormfront. Derek was a contributor to his father's hate website and an active white supremacist leader himself for many years. Now, Matthew Stevenson is an Orthodox Jew and was one of Derek's fellow students at New College in Florida when they were both undergraduates. So one day, Matthew, the Orthodox Jew, invited Derek, the white supremacist, to Shabbat dinner. And Derek attended. And then he attended again. And he continued attending Shabbat dinners regularly for years. And over time, a legitimate and close friendship grew. Now, Matthew, when he invited Derek, had no intention of conversion, only conversation. That was it. In fact, realizing how badly people on campus were treating Derek, whether he deserved it or not for his hate, realizing how bad, Matthew chose to strictly forbid any criticism of Derek during those Shabbats. Now, you might guess where this is going. Derek Black eventually completely rejected hate. And now he speaks out against it, against white supremacy, including in his own family. It took a long time. In fact, it was 2 years of Shabbat dinners before Derek said he even began to claim the realization that he himself was being racist, that what he believed and acted on for so long, indeed, how he defined himself, was not conducive to a free society. He finally understood after 2 years of Shabbats that what he thought was protecting those in his in-group was actually harmful. He finally realized that white supremacy hurt and killed people, including white people. Another story. Michael Kent. Michael Kent is an ex-con who was also a white supremacist for 20 years. Swastikas tattooed all over his body. And Tiffany Whitaker. Tiffany Whitaker is a probation officer. She is a person of color who was assigned to Michael's case. After working together closely for a time, they too became friends. And Michael too, eventually, completely rejected hate. And eventually, both Tiffany and Michael were invited to Martin Luther King Jr.'s family home to sit and speak with Dr. Bernice King, his daughter. And Michael also now speaks out against hate and white supremacy. So how did Derek and Michael change their hearts? Can we, like Matthew and Tiffany, can we do something to catalyze and assist such transformations? Can we talk about that certain things matter and certain things don't matter, like Star said in her story? Well, I can't presume to tell anyone. I certainly can't presume to tell marginalized people and people of color how to react to hatred. I don't have that lived experience. I can't relate to it. So I'm not going to sit here and instruct how to do that. Instead, I lift up these stories, and as a minister, what I can do is break them down, these courageous people's stories, break them down theologically. So hopefully a path will open for each of you. First bullet point. Number one, these people had the courage to have a one-on-one, face-to-face, extended conversations over time. They had the courage to meet each other as fellow humans rather than dehumanizing each other even though the marginalized person had been dehumanized by the other for so long. And we are all prone to dehumanize those with whom we vehemently disagree. They chose to meet each other as fellow humans. Looking into another's eyes directly, one on one, it is much more difficult to dehumanize them. Second point, even if not able to emphasize with the ideology of hate, and I don't know who could, Tiffany and Matthew still acted out of compassion, which eventually leads to empathy. Third point, these conversations began by inviting in rather than rejecting. By remaining open-minded rather than attacking or defending, by being prepared to listen as much as to tell. Both Derek and Michael, the white supremacists, they spent years learning to argue, learning to employ apologetics in defense of their worldview. Were they to be approached from an attack posture, they would have experienced Matthew and Tiffany as threats, and they would have attacked back and never returned to the conversation. At that point where Derek and Michael were, according to Tony McLear, who is the director of Life After Hate, a group that helps people leave white supremacist hate groups, at that point where they were, ideology and identity have become the same. And when you challenge their ideology, you challenge their sense of self. Next point. That being said, neither Tiffany nor Matthew compromised their own ideals or shrunk from their own identities in any way. Derek has since said that their story is not evidence that civil discourse and friendship alone is the answer. Now, it is an essential part of the answer, according to Derek, but at the same time, it's also essential to continue to speak up without compromise. Matthew was proudly and openly an Orthodox Jew, and he and others questioned Michael about his beliefs once they became friends. Tiffany, the parole officer, never for a moment tolerated or even ignored Michael's hate speech, even if it made her job that much more difficult to confront him directly and caused him pain. However hateful Derek's and Michael's diatribes or actions, Matthew and Tiffany committed to the idea that nobody forfeits their right to be a human being. Nobody forfeits their right to human dignity. You can hold another accountable while also validating them. There is a difference between being strong and calling people out and violating the humanity of another person. That's what they do, and we don't want to repeat that. Next point, Tiffany and Matthew decided that the only way to counter dehumanization, and I say they meaning white supremacists, not all conservatives, specifically hate groups. Next point, Tiffany and Matthew decided that the only way to counter dehumanization was through kindness, to attempt, however difficult, to see through the other's eyes, to meet hate with love, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. They tried to understand what the underlying cause or hurt might have been that led those others to seek refuge in this hateful community with seemingly intractable beliefs. Tiffany put it this way when speaking about those she worked with, like Michael. She said, "They're not a number, they're people." Next point. Make no mistake, there is no singular action or a quick fix to counter hate in our world. It is always a long and sometimes, often, always difficult process. In fact, as Derek realized, it's actually much more difficult to be anti-racist than it is to be white supremacist. Because to be anti-racist, you have to change the status quo. Final point. Michael and Derek, upon entering these spaces, these are the white supremacists, upon entering these spaces outside of their close communities, they certainly were scared and felt unloved and isolated, but they made a change. By interacting with Matthew and Tiffany, they were both at risk of losing their community, of being dehumanized themselves. But as Dr. Bernice King said to Michael, it takes a new experience to begin the process of change. So back to the story. In the interview with Krista Tippett, they did an interview on being, Derek and Matthew. In that interview, Derek said that he expected to be grilled about his beliefs when he went to that Shabbat dinner. He expected them to grill him. And he said it would have actually been better if they had grilled him about his white supremacist beliefs because he had spent his life in defense of those beliefs. He was raised being taught how to argue, and that confrontation and defense were permanent states of being alive. Now, they didn't confront him. And now, at this Shabbat dinner, he had to confront friendship with these people who he vilified. He had to confront humanization by these people he dehumanized. And that confrontation, he said, was his turning point. Life is a spiritual journey. It's a challenge to be met and overcome. It's a challenge that can excite and motivate just as easily as it can deflate us. It's a challenge that has as much potential to destroy as it does to strengthen the human spirit. It is never easy. It is always painful, and it takes patience and so much time. But given the boundlessness of the human imagination, and given human beings' inestimable capacity for compassion, I believe a better world is possible. And you know what? You may say, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.